Nora looked again. Closer this time. It wasn't May's. The figure was too far away, too shrouded in darkness. Before she could take a step forward, the green eyes flickered and vanished. Gone. A pit formed in her stomach. She stood frozen for several moments, staring into the empty street. Then she forced herself to move. She quickened her pace, pushing aside the unease crawling beneath her skin. By the time she reached the tavern, her hands were trembling. She climbed the stairs, unlocked her door, and stepped inside. The moment the door shut behind her, her composure shattered. A quiet sob escaped her lips. She sank onto the bed and slowly began to undress, peeling away each layer of clothing with care so as not to aggravate the old wounds hidden beneath. As the fabric fell away, pale scars emerged in the dim candlelight. Some were thin and jagged, others were deep, twisted pits in her flesh. Her fingertips brushed over them. To her, she was a monstrous thing, broken, defiled. A body stitched together by pain and survival. Her cloak slipped from her hands. Something clinked softly against the floor. Nora frowned. Beneath the pile of clothes lay an ornate necklace. At its center rested a dark stone, black as a moonless night. She picked it up. The instant her fingers touched the pendant, a strange sensation coursed through her. Warmth, recognition, as though she had been searching for it her entire life without ever knowing it. She closed her hand around the necklace. The room vanished. Her vision blurred. Darkness swallowed her whole. Then she saw it. A figure, humanoid in shape, yet impossible to truly look upon. Shadows clung to it, shifting and writhing like living smoke. An immense presence radiated from it, ancient and powerful. And yet, Nora felt no fear, only comfort, a warmth she had not felt since childhood. Then the figure spoke. "I greet you, my child." The voice sent a shiver through her. She knew it. The same voice that had spoken through the violet-eyed girl. The same voice that had visited her dreams long before the nightmares began. "My goddess," Nora whispered. Her voice trembled. "Why do you speak to me?" She reached out. The world shattered. Suddenly she was back in her room. She lay sprawled on the floor, the pendant clutched tightly in her hand. Her heart pounded wildly, but not with fear, with excitement. Something inside her had changed, only slightly. A tiny shift, so subtle she could barely describe it. Yet she knew. Hope. For the first time in years she felt hope. It bloomed within her chest like the first light of dawn after a long and endless night. The feeling was intoxicating. She felt like a child again. Nora slowly pushed herself upright, still dizzy from the fall. She opened her hand and stared at the black stone. Despite the warmth of her skin, the pendant remained cold, almost unnaturally so. Her thoughts drifted back to the children she'd met earlier. But when she tried to picture them, their faces seemed strangely obscured, as though hidden behind a veil. Then she remembered the green eyes, watching her from the darkness. A shiver ran through her. She had seen Maze die. She had seen the executioner's blade, seen her head tumble from the platform. Yet those eyes, they had been bright, almost glowing. Nothing like the dull, lifeless eyes that had stared at her from the blood-stained street. Something was terribly wrong, but she had no answers, and no strength left to search for them. Exhaustion settled over her like a heavy blanket. Still wearing only her undergarments, she slipped beneath the covers and sank into the surprisingly soft mattress. The pendant remained clutched in her hand. Sleep came quickly, and once again, her mind carried her into the past. No burning village awaited her this time. No screaming, no fire, only chains. She looked down at her wrists. Iron shackles encircled them, engraved with the marks of slavery. The dull ache of old wounds returned. She raised her eyes. Children sat around her, boys and girls her own age. Each of them wore the same iron links. Some cried, some prayed, some simply stared at the floor. Nora did none of those things. She did not beg, she did not weep, she did not break. She simply sat in silence, replaying the events of that terrible night over and over again. As though if she remembered every detail, she might somehow find a way to change the ending. Whispering curses in her father's name, Nora remained in the darkness. Time lost all meaning there. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, then years. 5 years passed, and she was still trapped within that cold, unbearable cage. The cell door creaked open. Nora scrambled to her feet, only to cry out as agony tore across her back. The sudden movement had reopened her newest wound, a deep lash left by the warden after she had refused to eat. Blood seeped through her tattered clothing and trickled down her skin. The warden had called it discipline. Nora called it cruelty. She awoke with a sharp breath. Her hand flew to her back. For an instant, the scar burned like fresh fire beneath her skin. The moment her fingers touched it, however, the heat faded, leaving only the familiar dull ache. Morning light streamed through the curtains. Another day. Another step toward revenge. She dressed quickly and descended the stairs into the tavern below. The common room was nearly empty. It was still too early for most patrons, and only the occasional clink of dishes broke the silence. Her stomach growled. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. Nora approached the counter and sat down. The chair was hard and uncomfortable. She raised a hand. "Pardon me. Could I get something to eat?" The man behind the bar looked up and sighed heavily. "All we've got this early is oats." He set a wooden bowl before her with all the enthusiasm of a man delivering bad news. Inside was a grey, lumpy mush. It looked barely edible. Nora didn't care. She was starving. She ate greedily, shoveling spoonful after spoonful into her mouth like a starving animal afraid someone might take the food away. Halfway through, she looked up. The innkeeper was watching her. Yesterday, his eyes had been filled with annoyance. Now they held something else. Pity. Embarrassed, she slowed. When the bowl was empty, she placed 3 copper coins upon the counter and quietly stood. Without another word, she left. Outside, the town had transformed. Unlike yesterday's suffocating silence, the streets now bustled with life. Merchants shouted from their stalls, children darted between the crowds, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. Yet beneath it all, something still felt wrong. The people smiled too little, laughed too softly, as if joy itself had become dangerous. Nora began wandering the streets, memorizing landmarks and alleyways. If things went wrong, and they often did, she needed to know how to escape. A flash of gold caught her eye, hair, disappearing into a narrow alley. Her pulse quickened. Without thinking, she followed. The figure moved swiftly, slipping around one corner and then another, always just out of reach, as though they were fleeing, or luring her. Nora pushed the thought aside and continued after them. Then, a dull thud, followed by laughter. Cruel laughter. She quickened her pace. As she rounded the final corner, the scene before her made her stop. A group of rough-looking men stood in a circle. At their feet lay a cloaked figure, trembling. One of the men had a boot pressed against their back. The thugs looked up as Nora approached. A grin spread across the leader's face. "Well, look at that," he said. "Another little pawn delivered right to me." Nora's eyes gleamed beneath the shadow of her hood. The man's smile faltered. For the briefest moment, fear flashed across his face. Then it was gone. He straightened and laughed loudly, putting on a show for his companions. Kicking the cloaked figure aside, he strode toward her. He reached out. Before Nora could step away, his hand closed around her arm. His grip was painfully tight. His skin felt hot, not with fever, with anger. It radiated from him like heat from a forge. "Let's see that pretty face, huh?" he sneered. He yanked back her hood. The moment he saw her, he recoiled. Then he gagged. A second later, he burst into laughter. He looked back at his companions. Well, shit. Another nasty elf. The others joined in. Nora stared at him coldly. Another. The word lodged in her mind. Slowly she lowered her gaze toward the cloaked figure she had been chasing only moments before. The figure's hood had slipped back, and a cascade of golden hair spilled onto the filthy stones. Gold hair spilled from the hood. Then came the sharp, pointed ears. Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Maze?" she choked out. The figure beneath the cloak slowly lifted its head. Green eyes met hers. They stared so deeply into her that, for a moment, she forgot to breathe. Before she could speak again, the leader's grip tightened painfully around her arm. She grimaced and turned toward him. "Let me go. Now." The pain was nothing compared to what she had endured over the past 10 years. If anything, it merely irritated her. The man scoffed. Or what? In one smooth motion, Nora drew her dagger. Steel flashed. The blade opened his throat. A wet gurgle escaped him as blood poured over his hands. His eyes widened in shock. He staggered backward, choking on his final breath before collapsing onto the cobblestones. Silence. Nora stared at the body. She did not enjoy taking lives, but she could never deny the rush that came with it. For a fleeting moment, she felt weightless, free, as if all the pain and fear she carried had been cut away alongside the man's life. The sensation vanished as quickly as it had come. The remaining thugs shouted in alarm and charged her. One swung wildly. She stepped aside. Another lunged. She ducked beneath the blow. Her body moved on instinct. These motions had been carved into her bones long ago, taught by her mother beneath the shade of ancient trees and practiced until her muscles screamed. Strike, turn, disarm. A fist drove into a man's stomach. The hilt of her dagger slammed into another's temple. A kick sent the last one sprawling into the alley wall. Within moments, they all lay groaning on the ground. Nora exhaled slowly. Then she turned. The cloaked elf was still trembling. Cautiously, she stepped closer. The figure flinched. "It's all right," she said softly. The words felt strange coming from her. With gloved hands, she reached for the edge of the cloak and carefully pulled it back. An elf man looked up at her. Not Maze. His hair was the color of spun gold, catching the fading sunlight like molten metal. His face was delicate, almost painfully beautiful, yet fear had hollowed his expression. Nora froze. For a moment, he had looked so much like her. Like the woman she had just watched die. "Who are you?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Then, a howl. Long, mournful, sickening. Every hair on her body stood on end. Her blood turned to ice. The hounds of Haven. Another howl echoed through the streets, then another. Nora slowly turned toward the sound. Sweat beaded upon her skin. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Footsteps suddenly rushed behind her. She spun around. The elf was gone, vanished, as though he had never been there at all. The alley stood empty save for the unconscious men and the blood staining the stones. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the howls faded. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Nora looked around once more. Nothing. No footsteps. No trace of the elf. Only the cold evening air. At last, she forced herself to move. She left the winding alley behind, but the fear remained. It flickered inside her like a dying flame. The bright colors of the sky slowly surrendered to dusk. She pulled her hood over her head once more. Her ears attracted too much attention. Eventually, she arrived at the dress shop. She opened the door. The bell chimed. She flinched again. Risa looked up from her sewing and offered a tired smile. "I just finished the uniform. You're right on time." Nora opened her mouth to speak, but Risa had already disappeared behind a shelf draped with worn fabric. "I did the best I could with the materials I had left," she called. There was a clatter of hangers. A moment later, she emerged with the uniform hanging from her arm. She held it up proudly. The dress was simple but elegant. Dark fabric trimmed with gold thread, sturdy enough for daily work, yet soft enough to be comfortable. Nora knew at once that it was well made. "This will work," she said quietly. Risa's smile dimmed. Nora realized too late how cold her words had sounded. She should have complimented the woman's work, should have thanked her. Instead, all she felt was dread. To her, the uniform looked less like clothing and more like a new set of shackles. She hated dresses. Even as a child, she had refused to wear them, choosing trousers and tunics instead. Her mother had always laughed and called her a stubborn little warrior. The memory made her chest ache. For a brief moment, Nora could almost hear that laughter again. Taking the dress from Risa's hands, Nora turned toward the door. "You're welcome," Risa mumbled softly behind her. The words gave Nora pause. For a brief moment, guilt stirred within her chest. She had said nothing. Not a thank you, not even a compliment. Yet the words caught in her throat, heavy and unfamiliar. In the end, she simply tightened her grip on the folded uniform. Without looking back, she stepped out of the shop. The bell above the door chimed. She flinched. The sound was small and harmless, but her body reacted all the same. The door closed behind her, leaving Risa and the warm glow of the shop behind. Once again, she stood alone in the darkening streets of Halcyon,